So as I typically do with messages, for those of you who have seen messages over the years, I like to start off with, some might say trivial pursuit, but in this case it'll be a couple of things that occurred to me over the last year that probably should have occurred to me 30 or 40 years ago. It didn't, but so it'll be something that's new to me, may not be new to you, but we'll just see as we go on. There may be some math involved, so that you kids be ready to go. There's normally a little bit. First observation, having to do with the day and month of this observance. And you guys, Bill, you've been down in this territory before. Yes, I have, but maybe not in the exact same way. So what's the date? Well, it's October 17th, but that's not how God determines time, right? So this is, first we'll start with a month. Which kid knows what month of the calendar for God it is? I'll give you a hint. The 7th month. Okay, so this is the 7th month of the calendar, is the biblical calendar. We'll just call it that way, without getting into too much in the way of detail. So it's the 7th month. We typically have heard it. It's Tishri is a different way it's pronounced. What I did not know is that's not actually the way it was referred to originally. So the Tishri is Babylonian in origin. And so I'll get into what the actual word is. So, and it's also, so the 7th month and the 15th day. This is the first day of the feast, the 15th, and goes through the 8th days, the 22nd. I know I would like for it to be easily divisible by a 7, and it's not, but there's probably a good reason for that, and we can get into that later perhaps. So it's the number 7. Once again, spiritual completion. God's not arbitrary. I think we know this by the way that he strategically uses names and dates and people and words and numbers. So much so in this case that you can have a pretty good idea when we show up to this feast that he's going to be accomplishing something significant spiritually. And not just accomplishing something, but finishing, completing something. Like a week is completed on the 7th day. The millennium kind of completes man's time on this planet and ushers in a new age. This 7th month does something that completes something God is trying to accomplish. And we'll talk about what that is. I think you guys probably already have an inkling of what it might be. But so here we are observing a special Sabbath during this 7th month. So we're looking for what completion of a spiritual goal might be that's represented by this 7th month. So we said, Tishri is what they started using when they came back from Babylonian exile, and it means beginning. So I was like, okay, so that's kind of how we get to the Jewish New Year equals Rosh Hashanah, right? But that's not originally what it was. So the original name for this month is Ethanim, which is, I saw various pronunciations, Ethanim, but let's just go ahead. Let's do it phonetically. It's Ethanim. And it's found in 1 Kings 8:2, and that's the only place in the Bible that you'll see a naming of the 7th month. And why is that? Because the number 7 is more important than the name, probably, right? So that's probably the way that God is. You always see, and in the 7th month, and in the 7th month, and on this day in the 7th month. That is over and over again. So, but the name is actually fairly interesting. I think it has some implications for one of Dr. Judson's songs. So it means, the word itself means constantly flowing. And it's both the proper noun of the month and of several permanent brooks and rivers. So you might say that this entire month of Ethanim means living waters, the entire month. So as we look through what goes on, and it kind of understands for those of you who are studiers of what's happened in the past and the Feast of Tabernacles tradition, even going back thousands of years, there was a water ceremony each day of the feast, 1 through 7. There was not a water ceremony on the 8th. We may or may not get into that, why that is. But so this entire month basically means living water. So a lot of things happened during this month of significance historically. It was the dedication of the temple, the Ark of the Covenant, and all that occurred in the Holy of Holies, and that was very significant. I was going to get into a little more Hebrew there, but my wife has warned me against doing that, so I won't do that. But there is another Hebrew word that it's based on that means permanence. And it can also mean a chieftain, a mighty ruler. So we have a month now that means living waters and a mighty ruler. Who would that be? Let me think about it. I think you guys are figuring it out already, haven't you? Yes. So as we look through, based on the number and the name of the month, I would expect this time to have something to do with Jesus Christ, our permanent chieftain, king, permanent life, living waters. Jesus is King of kings forever and ever. Ken already knew this. It might be something that's not new to the rest of you, but when I started thinking about it, I said, wow, have I been missing out? So anyway, that's the first thing. The second thing may have something to do with numbers as well. But this actually was brought up to me by a really smart fellow last feast. So we're going to be talking about sacrifices. Now everybody's like, oh, it's a great sacrifices. We're going to talk about blood, this, and no. We're going to talk about the number of sacrifices. I think Ken knows where I'm going here. So, in Numbers 29 in this case, it kind of goes through. We go to Leviticus 23. It says this is the day and this is when we do it. And then you go over to Numbers. In this case, Numbers starts. God explains to Israel the sacrifices, the offerings, and peace offerings, etc., etc. But in this case, it starts in. It's not normally just 10. We think off something, and that's why we have base 10 math. Let's not get into too nerdy stuff there. So there's another thing happening in Feast of Tabernacles where we have a countdown during the first 7 days. There's something really big happening on the 8th day, and I wonder what that could be. So we're going to get into a little bit of that, so I'll let you guys think about it yourselves. I think you probably have some ideas, and I'm suspecting that your ideas are correct. Okay, let's get to the actual topic for today. That was just your food for thought. It's what I do. Somebody said, Bill, why do you always do that? So, well, I'm not sure. You got to know me. They said, give me an example. Okay, let me think. When I was 9 years old is when you first go into baseball and it's a kid pitch and you're allowed to start stealing bases, right? But the rules are very specific. And so I read all these rules. And you couldn't leave the time until the ball crossed the plate. And so at the end of each play, the pitcher gets the ball, and then when his foot touches the rubber, you can't steal at that point. So it has to be after he touches the rubber, throws, and it crosses the plate. From that point until the next point that he touches the rubber is when you can steal, right? So I figured out when I was 9, first base. And then something happened nobody had ever seen before. I rounded first and ran directly to second, looking at the pitcher until he touched the rubber. If he had not touched the rubber, I kept running. And one time I ran to third, and they were confounded. They had no idea what was going on. They finally stepped on the rubber, and I had to stop there. And then the umpires and the coaches got together, and they said, it's fair, it's legal. Because they'd never say, that's me. It's not outside the box. I don't even know there's a box there, right? It's just, that's the way I think. So some people like it, some people don't, but yeah, I've never changed. That's so a little snippet for you. Anyway, so topic for today. Okay, since Ken asked, why are we here? I'm going to ask the kids. Okay, kids, we're here. We know why we're here. What is this day called? Oh, I'm sorry. What is this observance called? Oh, the whole observance is the Feast of Tabernacles. There we go. Yes, everybody's paying attention. Excellent. Okay. Is that it? Is it called anything else? Feast of? That is a feast. It is just not this particular one. Booths. I heard booths. That's correct. Anything? Oh, he's a kid at heart. Anything else? So, Actually, the Feast of Tabernacles, you'll see Feast of Booths, depending on your translation, you'll see shelters or temporary, I mean, there's all sorts of, that's basically all the same thing, which is a small shelter. And I think I did this last year, it's not the tabernacle, it's the tent, the little tabernacles, on purpose. And what we're going to talk about today a little bit more is the one that is less known as the Feast of Ingathering. For those of you who are, remember me, I've gone over this before, but it's not a repeat. This is going to be a little bit different. And this is also new. I guess I could put this under the third point from my introduction is I looked at it, and I kind of looked at every observance during the seventh month and how it was referenced. So there is Nehemiah 8 calls it the Feast of the Seventh Month. That's potentially another title for it, or it could be a description of when it happens, depending on your perspective. And then in Ezekiel 45, it's called the Feast of 7 Days. Isn't this thing 8 days? Well, let's not get into that. That's a whole other conversation. And in one translation, it's called the 7-day feast. So a lot of times, probably more so than the 7-day observance of unleavened bread, these days are kind of looked at as a combination. I mentioned a countdown. So we're going to focus on ingathering. Again, ingathering is not something that you just say every day. It's like, children, let's do the ingathering now, right? It's unless you're a farmer, and even then, I don't think you can really call it ingathering anymore. So it's one of those times. It's unfortunate that it's not a word that has as much meaning for us. But basically, if you take the in out, it's gathering up all the crops. It's basically everything. In the case of ingathering for a agricultural society, it's the main harvest. It's the big one. In biblical times, when we look at the holy days, particularly, we have 3 different harvests. We will not get into those in detail. I've done that many, many times, but there's a barley harvest, a wheat harvest, and you have the harvest, the big harvest. And in we'll see some references to kind of like the harvest. When you got one, a small harvest, and then, the harvest that's 90+% of your crops, which one of those 3 is the harvest? The last one, of course. So keep that in mind as we're looking at it. So, as I love to do, Ezekiel 23, what did I just say? Ezekiel. Exodus, I did say Ezekiel earlier. Exodus 23. And then we'll go to Leviticus 23, which is, oh no, actually I chopped that out for time. Scratch that. Okay, Exodus 23:14. You shall keep a feast to me 3 times in the year. So, Bill, don't we have 7 holy days? Yes, but it's kind of, as we know, we've divided up. Sometimes people have called it holy day seasons. We've tried different ways to describe it. I'm fine with any of those. But for this particular one, the 7th month that we described as, the meaning of the day, but it's also the Feast of Tabernacles, or Feast of Ingathering is the way that it's described. Let's continue on, verse 15. And you shall keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and you shall eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I commanded you, in the time appointed of the month Abib. And for in it you came out of Egypt, and no one shall appear before me empty. Also the Feast of Harvest. Now, don't get off, because this particular harvest is a smaller harvest. It's the wheat harvest. This is talking about Pentecost. The first fruits of your labors, so that's the indication. It's about the first fruits, not the main harvest, which you have sown in the field. And then also the Feast of Ingathering in the end of the year, when you have gathered in your labors out of the field. 3 times in the year all your males shall appear before the Lord. Okay, this ingathering only appears 2 times in Scripture. So I'm not trying to tell you that we need to start calling this the Feast of Ingathering, and the Tabernacles is completely out of our vocabulary. That's not the point of this. That's still the primary description, primary meaning, but they have tabernacles and ingatherings as a very complementary meaning, so I don't take issue with any of that. So, based on Exodus 23:16, what's the name of this feast? Feast of Ingathering. Okay. Is that it? Why is it Feast of Ingathering and not something else? Is it because it's capitalized like a day would be capitalized, right? Oh, wait. Was that done in Hebrew? No, it was not. What if it was called the Feast of Ingathering in the end of the year? That the whole entire thing was the name of the feast. Would you have a problem with that? Because you look at it, it's there. There's a comma. That comma is certainly not in Hebrew. How about we could say it's at the end of the year when you have gathered in the laborers out of the field? I think that's probably that when. Sounds like a qualifier, but that would probably also be, think about putting up a billboard or, a flyer. It's just too long. It doesn't sell well. You'd have to get a little shorter than that. So one thing to look at for year, that word in Hebrew, it's translated year almost all the time in most translations. But what it means is a year as determined by a full revolution. That's how even the kids know that. The revolution of the earth around the sun one time is a year. It's a full cycle. So the word can also be used to either be literally or figuratively a full cycle, and it's also used to indicate years as in ages or eras or eons, and that's the actual word of it is eon. So what if it's called Feast of Ingathering in the end of the year? It could also be plural, Feast of Ingathering at the end of the years. It could be Feast of Ingathering at the end of the age. That's allowed, or the end of the cycle. How does the meaning of the seventh day, the seventh month, does that have any implications on what the day might be called? So in my head, that's not official doctrine. You're not going to put it up on any wall. It's certainly not going to be written in stone anywhere. But to me, it's the Feast of Ingathering at the end of the age. That's the way I like to look at it. Take it or leave it. Enjoy it or not. So some would say, okay, Bill, you're taking too much out of this end of the age. I don't see this anywhere else for those who put together. Ooh, but ingathering is only there twice in Scripture. Let's see the second place where that is. It's actually a much shorter reference to these days. And that's in just a few pages over in Exodus 34. We'll go to verse 22, and just that's the only verse we'll do, just to be quick. So, and you shall observe here the three times that we just talked about. Feast of Weeks, which was described let me get there we go. Feast of Weeks, so I kind of jumped into the middle here. So, of the first fruits of the wheat harvest. So I mentioned that the Pentecost was the wheat harvest. That's where that comes in. So you could say Feast of Weeks, the wheat harvest. And notice what Tabernacles is called here. And the Feast of Ingathering at the year's end. So there's always this tie to the end of the year. And say, wait, I thought you just said that the seventh month is the new year. It's the beginning of the year, isn't it? Right? Well, that's civic, however you say it, not religious. But if the first month is, there's still, it seems like it's the middle of the year, right? Well, it depends on what year we're talking about, right? So God is ultimately accomplishing primarily spiritual things. So this seventh month is the end of the year in a spiritual way. Not just because it's the last, obviously, on next week it will be the last annual observance. But it's not just an annual observance, it's the completion of something spiritually. Think about if God was to say, okay, I've got all these holy days, we're going to go 1 through 7, and I'm going to just kind of leave you stranded there at 7. We're not going to get anything actually done. It'll just be kind of et cetera, will be the 7th. Of course, that doesn't make any sense, does it? So it's the end of the year, and when God is trying to get something done with mankind, we are thinking about the end of the age. So everybody's like, Bill, I already know this. It's like the feast is about the millennium and Jesus' return, the lamb, the lion. We know these things. But what I'm saying is before we even get into details about what the God says about these days, it's all kind of right there. It's like a day that you know exactly what it is before you even read the second sentence, like Groundhog Day or something, right? You know exactly what's going to happen. So that was God's intention. Whereas Tabernacles, that's going to take a little bit of explanation. You're going to say, okay, what are we talking about here? Is there a tent city? Is it the tabernacle in the wilderness? Where are we getting at it? So in this case, it's the big harvest at the end of the year / the end of the age. And what is God harvesting in terms of a spiritual harvest? Us, every human beings, right? So that's what we're going to get to. I mean, I gave away the punchline, but it's because you already knew it before I said it, so there was no actual risk to say so. But let's look at some references to the spiritual harvest. They're actually quite numerous. And there are parables, and there are situations where we read it and it's like, oh yeah, of course, that's what that means, but then we don't really come back to it. I think our background, we don't focus on the harvest. And my belief is that the reason for me individually was I didn't want to talk about the harvest because what was the greatest attack about the irrelevancy of these days? It was, Phil, they're just harvest festivals. You know, we got a rice harvest festival, we got a corn harvest festival. It's for an agricultural society. We're enlightened, technologically advanced. It means nothing for us. And, you know, instead of saying, what? It's like God is thinking in terms of harvesting us. So people say, well, you know, what is the nature of God? I said, I don't know. I'm a human being. How can I answer that? What God chooses to reveal his nature is that he's Father, Jesus is Son, and I'm a son. A lesser son, but a son. That's about the extent that I can understand, and no 1,000-page dissertation is going to have me understand it any better. Same thing with these, right? That's what God reveals, that the harvest is a spiritual harvest. He's harvesting us. It's fairly straightforward, and I mean, it shouldn't surprise you that a spirit being is not going to have us for the next 1,000 years be worried about the potatoes or the corn. I mean, that was just a way for them to understand it. That was the type and the reality that we know about the holy days. The reality is Jesus Christ. Of course, Jesus Christ's mission is this great mission that we've already talked about, and that's bringing many children to glory. So again, here we are preaching to the choir. Let's look at Matthew 9:35. So what is this gathering in the harvest? I mean, okay, yeah, we got. I understand that the harvest is God's harvesting. The great harvest is about people, but what does that mean? Matthew 9:35, and Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But seeing the crowds, he was moved with compassion on them because they were tired and scattered like sheep having no shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray to the Lord of the harvest that he will send out laborers into his harvest. So even though it kind of sounds weird when you're young, what's being harvested? It says the tired and scattered. Was it tired and scattered dogs? Oh, no. We're talking about tired and scattered people. God is harvesting human beings. Who are the laborers? You know, at that time was disciples and teachers and anybody who's kind of signed on for the mission. Who's the Lord of the harvest? I think in this context, we're going to go with God the Father since Jesus is talking. I think that Jesus also has a role there. So as we look at it, and the implications of the harvest has always been about the spiritual harvest, we're like, oh yeah, so, you know, the idea of, you know, we're enlightened, we don't need this stuff, those comments are not going to age very well. Because that's what the harvest has always been about. Okay, let's look at a couple of parables. Actually, I'm going to probably get us down to one. Yeah. Matthew 13, there are two harvest parables. We got the parable of the sower. So basically, you sow, you plant, and then you reap. That's a harvest. That's what we're talking about. But we're going to spend more time on the tares, darnels, and weeds, depending on your translation. This is one of Neil's favorite. If you want more details on the darnels, just see him after church. And I'm going to kind of jump in there at the end of the explanation of what the parable of the sower means. Because I want to get to the point that we're talking about spiritual harvesting. Matthew 13:22 is where we'll start. And that sown into the thorns is this: he who hears the word, and the anxiety of this world and the seed of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. Notice the thing, I'm not going to spend any time on this now, but it's like anxiety and materialism are the two things that choke out the word. Has there ever been a time where there's been more of both of those together, especially in situations where there really shouldn't be? It's like, well, I got anxiety. Yeah, that's because, we're at war, the village is being bombed, there was a bomb that dropped in my front yard. And we're talking about people who have tremendous anxiety and they're sitting in their homes watching a $2,000 TV and sitting on, in a massaging chair, right? It's like, that's how good Satan has got at his role right now. Verse 23, but that sown on the good ground is this: he who hears the word and understands, who also bears fruit and produces one truly 100-fold and 160 and 130. Parable of the weeds. He put out another parable to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed darnel among the wheat and went his way. But when the blade had sprung up and had produced fruit, then the darnel also appeared. So the servants of the householder came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? Then where have the darnels come from? And he said to them, an enemy has done this. The servants said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them up? But he said, no, lest while you gather up the darnel, you also root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather together the darnel and bind them in bundles, then to burn them, but gather the wheat into my granary. Now, there's several different ways that we could focus on this particular passage. And I'm going to go in a direction you don't suspect. The harvest means, look, we got that word there, gather, right? So this is the ingathering. But notice what's gathered. It gathers both the weeds and the wheat. So it's a gathering of both good and bad, if we want to just be simplistic. So then he explains it in verse 36. We'll jump down. And then sending the crowds away, Jesus went into the house, and the disciple came to him and said, explain to us the parable of the darnel of the field. He answered and said to them, he who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. That's Jesus Christ, fairly easy to understand. The field is the world. Okay, so we're going to be harvesting out of the world, which means everybody in it. The good seed are the sons of the kingdom. You don't often see this language used, the sons of the kingdom. I find that interesting. Followers of Jesus Christ, but he's coming as king to establish a kingdom. Well, I'm sure there'll be some sermon or discussion about this in later days. But the darnel are the sons of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. And notice what? The harvest is the end of the world. And there's that same eon. And I actually misspoke earlier. This is where eon comes in. Year is not, so that I'll have to look that up later. But eon is translated world here. And the reapers are the angels. So an interesting reference, and there are some others that we may get to later. Therefore, as the darnel are gathered and burned in the fire, so it shall be in the end of this world, end of this age. And I don't have a problem with this world either, because you think about it, it's certainly in God's terms, shortly thereafter, we'll have a new heaven and new earth. So the world will not be around too much longer. After all this happens, we don't know if it's a minute or a flash of a second or whatever God has in mind. We don't get a vote. The Son of Man shall send out his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and those who do iniquity, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous shall shine out like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has an ear to hear, let him hear. So we have that same reference of a gathering, both of the righteous and the unrighteous, those who are being gathered together for fire and those who are gathered together for eternal life. So, and we've looked at it, and I won't get too much detail, but certainly have a picture showing, it would start combining Matthew 9 and Matthew 13. We know the field is the world. What's being harvested are people. Good seeds are sons of the kingdom. Darnels are the sons that are sowed by Satan. The laborers are disciples, teachers. Lord of the harvest is God. The harvest is the end of the age, with the reapers being the angels. So we have an entire picture of how things are said to occur here at the end of the age, and it matches what is described in the Gospels and in Revelation that we won't have time to get into, but I will note in Luke 10:2, again referencing the harvest. In this case, I think the translation looks good, and it's called his harvest. So we have the harvest, we have the harvest at the end of the age, and then we have his, meaning God's harvest. Kind of underscoring the point that this is a fundamental, this is the point of his plan. So, we know that there's some, especially in this last verse, it kind of focused on those who are being gathered up for fire. We don't like to focus on that. It's a reality of what life in the future is going to be about. But there's also gathering for good. So let's look at John 4 real quickly. John 4:35. Do you not say it is yet 4 months and the harvest comes? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white to harvest already. And he who reaps receives wages and gathers fruit to life eternal, so that both he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. Different translation, the one who reaps the harvest is being paid and gathers the crops for eternal life. So the one who plants and the one who reaps will be glad together. So these crops are being harvested for eternal life. And some of you think, okay, Bill, this doesn't fit my timeline, right? Because we, the church, and the larger we, church, whoever that is that God determines, when the bad guys are resurrected, haven't we already been spirit beings for 1,000 years and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years, right? Well, of course. But that's what this day is about. Remember, we're the wheat harvest. Our time's already happened. We're the church, and those who are Jesus now are dealt with in that wheat harvest. So the harvest is about everybody else. So we can rejoice that that's occurring for them, but there are those that are coming up and they're going to have eternal life. But it's going to be people who are not the church. How he does that, looking in minds, there's been speculation there's 100 years. There are about 100 different hypotheses there, and I don't espouse any particular one. I just know that God has a way of getting there, and he doesn't need my help. There might be some situations where, he says, well, you'll judge over angels, et cetera, et cetera. But I think in these important matters, he will not delegate. But the point being, kind of where I want to end here, I've got another couple pages I could go through, but you know how I do. So you're going to say, okay, Bill, if that's what you're telling me, didn't you just steal the 8th day sermon? No, I didn't. They're gathered, step 1, for judgment, step 2. So the first 7 days are about the gathering of the harvest. And then on day 8, they get sorted and dealt with. So what I talk about, from the perspective of the Feast of Ingathering, these 7 days are about gathering up the entire harvest. And I just told you it's not about the church, so you can delete how many people there, but it's all people. And you're like, Bill, there's going to be like 1 billion people on the planet when Christ returns. Yeah, not 1 billion. Estimates of all people who lived at all times is roughly 120 billion people. I'm not sure how they get there. Probably the same people who He's told us the universe was 1 billion, then 2 billion, then 4 billion, then 10 billion years old. So I don't know how accurate that is, but let's assume it's 100 plus billion people who've lived. So during this time represents when 120 billion people are going to be gathered together. And you say, well, maybe that's why it takes 7 days. Maybe God could do that in a blink of an eye. So, and I'll leave this for the kids. So I was like, okay. So basically what you're saying is you're gathering a whole bunch of people, 120 billion people, and they're ready. And then the day turns to day 8, which I'll let the speaker on that day get into, and that's when the judgment happens. But how are they arranged? I mean, is it along the line? I was like, okay, let's assume that it's like a concert, and we're just smashed together, right? So if you do that, it takes about 2.5 square feet for a person. So now let me get out my calculations. So if we get 120 billion people, like, Bill, there's no way you could get 120 billion people to stand up on the entire planet. The Earth's a lot bigger than you think. I'm going to go back down here. Okay, so if 2.5 square feet per person, so we got a mile. Does anybody know how many feet are in a mile? Yes, okay, we got a couple of good answers. Yes. Now, which of you two can now give me 5280 times 5280, the number for that? Ross, I was thinking maybe. Okay. So that number is 27,878,400 square feet, which means if we're really crammed together at 2.5 square feet per person, you can actually get 11 million and change of people per square mile. So that means if you get 120 billion people together, you can do so in just about 10,500 square miles. To give you perspective, that's almost exactly the size of Israel during Solomon's reign. That's how that would be. So, kind of jumped around there a little bit, as I tend to do, and give you little things here and there to talk about. Obviously, the harvest being the most important, but what we know is that getting 120 billion people gathered together is going to be a pretty significant thing, probably the most miraculous or crazy thing that anybody's ever seen. And if, obviously give them more than crammed together, that would be a pretty large gathering, probably the most impressive physical thing we will ever see. I don't know how God exactly is going to accomplish that. I don't think anybody here does. But we know it's going to happen, and we know it because he wills it. And I'm looking forward to seeing